I'm Contessa Brewer. Thank you for joining us. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber, has been sentenced to death by a judge for his role in the bombing that killed 3 people and injured 260 others. In an unexpected turn, Tsarnaev addressed his victims for nearly 5 minutes. He asked for forgiveness. He said, quote, "I'm sorry for the lives that I've taken, for the suffering that I've caused you, for the damage that I've done, irreparable damage. I pray for your relief, for your healing." During today's sentencing, nearly 24 victims spoke for 3 hours about the impact the 2013 bombing had on their lives. They called his actions cowardly and disgusting. Tsarnaev will likely be moved to the federal death row unit in Terre Haute, Indiana. The execution could last several years, could happen several years after an appeals process. Joining us now is CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman. Rikki, nice to see you today. When we're looking at this, why was it so unexpected that Tsarnaev made that statement?
I think there wasn't a legal expert I know of, including myself, who thought that he would speak. And certainly, I think that his being as remorseful, if you believe him, was very profound. We've heard from victims after his speaking. We heard from one who really believed him, took him at his word that he appeared honest and genuine, and we had 2 who didn't believe him at all. The real question would be, for me, what do the jurors think? You had 14 of them in that courtroom, and I'm sure that they had to have a sense of, would this have made any difference or not at the time that they sentenced him to death if he had spoken during the penalty phase.
Carmen Ortiz, the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, also came out, the prosecutor in this case, and seemed very disgusted, just disappointed at the very least, with the specter of religion in Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's statement. Why?
Well, I think what she is saying, and of course this is her personal feeling, what she is saying is that the religion of Islam is a religion of peace. And that for him to ask for mercy from Allah, for him to talk about that during this month of Ramadan, that this is also something that had an influence on him about why he wanted to speak, why he wanted to say he was sorry, why he regretted what he did, that what she was saying was, what didn't you say? You did not renounce terrorism. You did not renounce violence, extremism. And to invoke Allah in the month of Ramadan is a perversion, my term, a perversion of the religion of Islam. So she was taken and was, to use your word, disgusted by what he did not say.
His words here, he says Ramadan is a month of mercy from Allah to his creation, a month to express gratitude to Allah and express gratitude to his creation, a month during which hearts change. But might that be the reason why, I mean, by all accounts, for the whole trial, for the penalty phase of this, he has sat, he has not connected with the people who've been testifying against him. We did hear from a young man, Henry Borgard, who said that when he was giving his victim statement, he said Dzhokhar Tsarnaev made eye contact with him, and he said it wasn't like looking into the face of a criminal, it was like looking into the face of a boy. But for the most part, what we're hearing from people is that he sat and seemed rather uninterested in what the people had to say who were testifying against him. Might the month of Ramadan be what changed his heart?
Perhaps, but we also have to remember that Sister Helen Prejean, who is the nun who has done so much work against the death penalty, she did testify on the defense behalf during the penalty phase, and she said she had met with him approximately 5 times, where he constantly and consistently expressed remorse. That was the closest they got during the trial. A decision had to be made both on the part of the defendant as well as his lawyers that during the guilt phase as well as the penalty phase that he had to make a decision, advised by them, that he would not testify. So what changed? Was it the month of Ramadan, or was it that he felt he had a real need that perhaps he had been expressing for quite some time, that he needed to express his sorrow?
The other thing is, you know, for a guy this young, it has to be jarring, no matter what kind of evil you've planned and carried out, to hear people calling you a monster over and over and over again, and to hear your actions described as despicably evil. That surely somehow some of that would have sunk into this young man's mind. And the words, again, on the face of them, to say that he was listening to the suffering, that it was unbearable, it was horrendous, this thing that he had put his victims through, and to apologize. Again, the words themselves asking for mercy, not only from God, but from Allah, but also from his victims as well. But you pointed out people hear that through their own prism and their own perspective, and clearly some of the victims did not buy it.
Well, when we listened to Lynn Gillian, she was furious. She was absolutely furious with his words. Didn't believe one of them. Thought that it was, in essence, rehearsed, that it was rhetoric.
She actually said she wished she hadn't heard it.
She wished she hadn't heard it. And I think that we understand victims' grief, and it's hard to imagine what any of these people went through, from the parents of Martin Richards to someone who suffers post-traumatic stress disorder, perhaps because they were a block away, or perhaps they were standing in front of one of the windows which burst. That I do not put a price on what a victim's grief is. The reality for me here would be, what do the jurors think? I'd like to know if, and perhaps by tomorrow, we will hear from one or any of them, but would it have made a difference? Would it have made a difference? Because all the defense needed was one. Would it have made a difference to them if they had heard this during the penalty phase?
Do you think that just as a human being now I'm talking about, do you think that after you vote for the death penalty, that psychologically you could go back on that and say, you know, if I'd heard that, I probably wouldn't have voted for the death penalty?
I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know, because he was stoic, or arrogant, or aloof, or uncaring, depending on your perspective, as you watched him in the courtroom, or as others reported watching him in the courtroom. Right. That there was no emotion, except, of course, for when his aunt testified and he shed a tear, which was worse than having no emotion, because it was about him. So does it change your mind? And if it does, as a juror, could you actually admit it?
These are the sketches from inside the courtroom today. We can see him bearded, looking very different, I have to say, from those initial mug shots or the video that we saw inside the detention. And here, the one with his lawyer as well, as he's giving his statement. Let's talk about what happens next, because some of the victims, some of the families have said, we don't want the death penalty because we don't want this to be drawn out over years and years. We want closure. We want to move on. We want to stop thinking about this guy who caused so much damage. Will they ever hear from him again? Will they ever see him again? Do they ever need to be back in court giving another victim impact statement?
Well, I hope for their sake that they do not. There are two ways that they would have to be back in court again. One is if the Middlesex District Attorney's Office decides to go forward with a separate prosecution, which is statewide. It's within their county, the murder of Sean Collier, who was the MIT police officer who was killed the night of the beginning of the chase after the Marathon bombing. The other time that they might have to ever go back to court again would be if this case were reversed on appeal and a decision was made to retry him to get the death penalty. For the victim's sake, I hope they don't have to do that. But in the system of justice, that at least on the appeal, that the First Circuit has to hear this case with objectivity and look at the motions objectively that were filed that would possibly create an appellate error. Ultimately, my guess is they will never hear or see him again in person. What happens during the appellate process is we have a number of years where there are post-trial motions filed in front of Judge O'Toole, this judge, motions for new trial. That's something you have to do. My assumption is he would deny them. And then you will have a First Circuit Court of Appeals. It could take a year or two easily before it even gets argued.
Rikki Klieman, thank you so much for lending your years of experience and your expertise to the conversation. Again, the story that we've been watching today, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber, sentenced to death following a statement where he apologized to his victims, surprising not only legal experts, but many of the victims as well.